So thanks for attending our workshop here, Raising Meat Birds. My goal is to share some information with you in about an hour, try to share some feedback back and forth. I'm gonna throw a lot at you. I can't see all of you, which is a little challenging with presenting this kind of stuff. Normally I do this live, so it's a little different format. But let's get started, and then we'll chat a little bit more. There's a chat window at the bottom, by the way. You can use that to pose questions or stop me. Somebody thankfully reminded me to turn my microphone on. So who am I? So I'm a farmer at heart, and I'm really proud of that. I do a lot of other things, but farming is one of the things I love. I have raised or raise now beef. I grew up with beef, pigs, and I do pigs on and off, layers. One of the photos in the middle of the screen there is some layers that we've raised in the past. My daughter Lucy's got 150 2.5-week-old chicks in the brooder right now. I've done meat birds, which is obviously what we're going to talk about. And I currently have alpacas. There's a couple pictures there. I teach chicken harvest, and that's a whole nother workshop that, well, it's scheduled for June. We'll see if that can come off. And then I've also taught alpaca shearing. And the reason I like to do a lot of this is I like the ability to bring food into my home from my garden or my farm, as opposed to just the supermarket. We're very lucky, at least in the North Country, at least local to me, that we have a lot of great farms. So I don't feel the need to do as much farming as I used to. So my first career was in college admissions at Utica College. That was a long time ago. I'm currently the 4th generation owner of Ward Lumber since 1988, and there's an aerial view of one of our facilities there. So I've lost track. I had to mute all with my screen shared, but that is the goal, to keep the ambient noise down. You can unmute yourself, and I encourage you to do that if you want to ask a question. There's also the chat. And if you have the ability to now, as we get started, in that chat window, tell me where you're from, like a town, unless you're from somewhere in Pennsylvania, and then include your state. Have you raised birds before, or this is your first time? And give me a one-liner what you want to learn from the webinar. And I'll try to make sure that we get that covered. So while you're doing that, I'm going to take a moment to try to change the window in which I see you. So if anybody's done any chat, it's not coming through, and that will be challenging. Oh. Malone, okay, so Jane is from Malone, grew up on a farm, and meat birds are new for you. Excellent. So Jane, you're the kind of person that I want to reach, because this is going to be that introductory kind of information. Catherine is from Jay. So goals listed on the screen. Focus on first-time farmers. And some of you appear to be in that realm, which is great. And empower you to raise your own food. And feeding chickens isn't hard to do, but getting them from the pasture to the plate maybe is sometimes the impediment. And that's why we have a suite of equipment that we rent out to folks that buy the feed from us, and why I teach a chicken class, a chicken harvest class, but that's another whole nother topic. So goals are to share best practices as I've learned them, and done them, and learn from others. And my last goal is meeting your goals. There are goals down at the bottom about introducing to Ward Lumber and introducing our feed business, and maybe selling some chicks and feed and providing rental equipment, but it's really about teaching you guys. So here's a quick overview of what, the who, what, when, where, and why. So who can raise chickens? You can, I can. We all can. And I mentioned a meat chicken co-op at Ward Lumber. Over the years, I have offered our employee team the opportunity to join a meat co-op in order to get access to organically raised local chicken at a pretty good price. So this can be done a lot of ways. I've got some more chat responses, so I want to read those out. Michelle is from St. Regis Falls. Welcome, Michelle. This is your second or third batch of, second or third batch of meat birds. Great. Aaron is from Plattsburgh, and this is new. Catherine raised layers, thinking about a couple of meat birds. Great. Judith is from here in Jay, has raised meat birds, given the current situation, thinking about it again. Great. Mike is also from St. Regis Falls, never raised birds and would like to raise enough to freeze. And we can certainly do that to get you through the winter. Excellent. And Dan Edelman gets the long distance award. He is from Bethlehem, PA, and is somebody that I know through business and just did an awesome looking garden. Thank you all for sharing that. So so I often do egg layer workshops. I did that earlier in the year just before COVID hit. Meat birds for your table or for sale. And we won't get a whole lot into the sale part because most everybody seems to be doing it for themselves. When can you raise meat birds? Now is a great time. Layers all year round, but meat birds pretty much in the spring and summer and fall. Summer's asterisk because the heat is sometimes harder on meat birds as they get bigger. We can probably get into that. Where can you raise meat birds? At your house, at my house, in your backyard, your front lawn, an old pasture, even at a friend's or relative's house. Meat birds on pasture, and I'm really assuming that we're talking about meat birds on pasture. They can be raised a lot of places. They can be raised in an old barn in a lot of places. But if we're talking about on pasture, they don't need really fancy ground. So there's lots of possibilities. They are low impact, and we'll get into that as well. So why would we raise meat birds? Because they're better, they're cheaper, they're healthier for you, the bird, and the planet. I think raising meat birds on pasture in containment is a great way to give the meat birds a good life before they then feed our families. Healthier, I offer this picture of a store bird I picked up one day in the store and looked at it. And on the nutrition label, there is 3% sodium. Why would there be 3% sodium? Because when those birds are harvested, they are put in a saltwater bath and they soak up a bunch of water. So if we're buying a 5-pound bird, some of that is actually salt water. If you grow your own birds, there's no salt water added. So if you've got a 5-pound bird, you've got 5 pounds of bird to eat, as opposed to some ocean. So meat birds is an easy way, or one of the easier ways to access protein for you and your family, as opposed to maybe raising beef or even pigs that are a little bit more involved. So it's a great gateway farming opportunity, depending on the breed, 6 to 9 weeks, start to finish, to have a freezer full of chicken. And there is an easy on-farm harvest option. There are other options, and I think Judith wants to talk about another group option, but the harvest is easily done on the farm, and as I said, I teach that, so it can be accessible. So we're going to talk about brooding baby chicks, waters, feeders, water and feed, choosing a breed. There are less choices in meat birds than there are in layers, but we'll talk about a couple of breeds. We'll talk a little bit about housing, some troubleshooting issues, a little bit about harvest time, and then we'll do Q&A. Any questions so far? No. Hearing none. So the first step is brooding, and we'll talk about break that down a little bit. But when we're brooding baby chicks, mother hen is not available, and we are mother hen. So we've got to work at caring for them more in the first 3 weeks or so, in the case of the meat birds. So let's get into brooding. So when we're talking about a day-old chick or a couple day-old chicks, we're talking about a bird that hatches in a hatchery. We use a couple of hatcheries in Ohio. They're going to be shipped, and we'll, I think, get into that in another slide, but we've got to prepare for them before they arrive. So before the chicks arrive, we want to create a space that is warm, dry, and free of drafts. And the free of drafts part, I'll probably dwell on that too much, but we need to provide the chicks protection from cold, rain, and again, I mentioned drafts. So also, in some cases, there are predators like rodents or your family dog or cat that we got to deal with. So drafts, I think I've got it 3 times on this slide, maybe 4, because it is the biggest issue that new folks end up with for baby chicks. So any kind of layout works for a brooding area. Circular works well because drafts cause chicks to huddle, and if they huddle into a corner, they often have issues. So if you can have a circular space, that's ideal. Our brooder is not circular. We put some dividers in that have a little roundness to it. But it can be almost any space where you can keep them dry, draft free, and out of predators, and warm. Start with a small space, but plan for them to grow, especially meat birds are going to grow very quickly. Like they will double in size in 3 days, 4 days. So when you set up your brooder, and this is a decent setup here, heat in the middle, lost my cursor, heat in the middle, and then water and feed to the side. They've got to be able to be under that heat, and then they can go out to feed and water if they choose to. So when a brooder's set up, baby chicks are in there, they're under the light, as in the photo at the left. When it's cold, they're going to be in there, and then when it's warm, they're going to be away from there. So in this brooder example, there's a lot of chicks under the light and nobody feeding and drinking. They're probably a little bit chilly. The solution to that is often to lower the light closer to the floor, but then also look for drafts. In this example, nobody's near the heat, so it's too hot in there. They're trying to get away from the heat. This example is when there's a draft, when they're going all in one direction. That usually means over here is cold, or the whole thing could be drafty and they're pushing into one corner to get away from some breeze. If it was just cold, they'd be under the light. So this example often occurs, or I get a call after this example when somebody says, well, a bunch of them died in the corner. I don't know why they went into the corner to die. They didn't go in the corner to die. They got stuck in the corner and it got cold for some reason. And when they get cold, they huddle. And when they get really cold, they really huddle very hard. And the ones in the corner can't get out and they end up suffocating. So drafts and loss of your heat source are usually the 2 killers for fresh chicks. This is ideal. And these birds are going to have a nice little pleasant cheep, cheep, cheep. Birds, when they're too cold, are going to have a lot shriller and unhappy voice. But this is where you want to be. Birds all around, pecking and looking and having fun. So let's talk about temperatures in the brooders. So now we're kind of getting into the summer. So I'm going to focus on the summer temperature range. For the first week, they need to be the warmest at 90 to 95. And then as time goes on through the first 3 weeks, that temperature requirement goes down because they're going to feather out. When they are a day old, they are going to have little downy feathers that do very little for keeping them warm. By the time they reach about 3 weeks old, they've got most of their feathers and they are much more self-sufficient. Now, that temperature of 90 degrees is technically 6 inches above the litter where their little heads are going to be living at some point. I will tell you, I don't have a thermometer in my brooder anymore. When I did, I threw it on the ground because I didn't have a way to hang it at 6 inches, or at least didn't take the effort. But their behavior is really going to tell you when they're happy. When they're too close to the middle, they're cold, and when they're all the way out to the outside, they're too warm. So here we go. This is how the chicks are going to arrive, these shipping boxes. Those shipping boxes are divided into quarters. I don't know that it's obvious to see, but there's a divider there and there's a divider there. Each quadrant will hold 25 chicks. So each box will hold 100 chicks. So if you're ordering chicks from us or any hatchery, well, I don't know about any hatchery, but in our case, you don't have to order 25 or 100 chicks. You can order any combination of 6 or above. New York state law requires a minimum purchase of 6 chicks. And that, I'm told, is an Easter basket law. So somebody doesn't buy 2 chicks, give them to the kids on Easter, and then who knows what happens to them. But you can buy 6 or more chicks, and if any of you are on our Facebook page, you know, 2 weeks ago we got in 800 birds in one day. So we aggregate those orders so you can order any quantity, and the hatchery will combine them, and then we separate them when they get on site. So you're going to get a box like that. And by the way, they come through the U.S. mail. And I will tell you, when they hit the local post office, we get a call right away because they're not totally happy in there and they are noisy. So if you get them shipped to you, I'm sure you'll get a call from the post office quite promptly upon arrival because they want to get those little guys out of there. My practice when I'm taking them from the shipping box into the brooder is to count them, because often Lucy, my daughter, ordered 150 chicks and 155 came. Typically get 1 or 2 extra. So I want to know what count I'm working with. So as I count them one at a time out of the box, I dunk their beak into the waterer. It just gives them a jump start. It gives them the idea, oh, that's where the water is, I'll drink. They've got good instincts. Chickens have good instincts. Turkey poults, which I've not raised, I'm told don't have great instincts. If you're going to raise turkey poults, start them off with chicks. They'll learn from the chicks. So dunk their beak. Get them started. Put some electrolytes in the water for the first gallon of water or 2 to get them started. To the right is a nice little brooder setup. That one's got round corners. It's using a cardboard enclosure, which is very expandable. So that's a handy thing. These are some good examples. 25 chicks or so in there. If there's not another waterer here, I'd add another one just to have enough space, just in case everybody wants to eat and or drink at the same time. You want to have enough space so they're not crawling all over each other. This one to the right looks adequate for today. Those look like about day or 2 old chicks. As I said, they're going to double in size, and that space is going to get small really quickly. And as long as I've been raising birds, I am still amazed at how big they get, how quickly they get, and how much additional space they take so quickly. So in the brooder, and I have another example of this, I like to put in sod, and if you've got layers, a roosting stick. I don't recommend it for meat birds, and I'll show you why in a bit. But that's all about enrichment. It's all about giving them something to do. So this brooder on the right, lots of great heat. And while I see that, 3 lamps is great, because if you have only 1 heat bulb and the bulb happens to go out, without redundancy, they're going to get cold overnight and you may lose some. Having 2 heat lamps is a great secondary, great backup, great redundancy, so that if one fails, you've got another. This brooder is really tight. Those chicks are too close. Maybe this looks like day 1 or 2 based on the size, but it's going to be very tight and there's going to be issues very quickly. And here's the issue that often comes about. I call it tail pecking. I'm not sure if there's a technical word for it. It most often occurs in younger chicks before they get feathered out. This bird is feathered out. Usually in young chicks at about the week stage or so, the 1 week stage. Tail pecking, and it's often caused by lack of space. So this brooder on the right is going to have a serious lack of space, and they're going to have a lot of bloody tails. It can be caused by stress. So what can cause stress for chicks? The family cat looking over the edge of the brooder, very stressful if you're a baby chick. So those kind of stresses. Too much interaction from people can sometimes cause stress right away, but most layers will get used to it and actually be fine with it. Meat birds are a little bit iffier with it. Boredom is also a reason for this tail pecking, and a solution is enrichment. So I took this picture this morning in my daughter Lucy's brooder, and you can see examples of a lot of bunches of sod. It's hard to tell up here, but she's got sticks in there that they can hang out on. And we did have some tail pecking issues early on. We had to quickly enlarge the space, put in enrichment, and it subsided. If you get this, my best suggestion for solution is bag balm. Bag balm is a bit of a salve, and if they peck at it, it doesn't taste great. Anybody that uses bag balm knows it doesn't smell great. I encourage you not to get it on their wingtips. Their wingtips are right here, so it's easy to get on the wingtips. And in my experience, even just a couple of weeks ago, if you get it on the wingtips, they're going to have to clean it off. Birds like to groom themselves. Lots of different ways to do brooders. As I said, in an old horse stall, anywhere, a garage, your bathroom tub, although it makes it hard to take a shower, an old water tank. A lot of things can be used. Expandability is key. This is a brooder, and a friend had a hay bale brooder. It caught on fire because of the heat lamps in the hay, so just be cautious that there's no fire. They ended up losing some chicks. So let's talk about, well, any questions?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And if anybody chatted a question, forgive me, I'm not getting a prompt. So thank you for speaking up.
Yeah. My question is, what do you use for the bedding?
Oh, thank you. I think I'll get to that, but I want to answer it now. Shavings, pine shavings is the best bedding. And shameless plug here, full disclosure, we sell pine shavings at Ward Lumber, and they're made across the street. I get questions, well, what about cedar shavings? Cedar shavings smell good and all those things. The tannins in the cedar shavings are a little bit too much for those tiny little lungs. So it's a little bit toxic for them. Pine shavings are great because it'll soak up the liquid from the manure, and pine shavings will bind the nitrogen because chicken manure is very heavy to nitrogen, and the ammonia can be very toxic. So a pine shaving will bind up that nitrogen and make a much more pleasant brooder floor. Thank you. Was that you, Judith, that asked?
It was, and I have one more question.
Yes.
I saw the early picture of the swimming pool being used, the plastic swimming pool. And would that like house 25 birds, and for how long would they be able to fit in that pool?
That would house 25 birds on day one, but about day 3 or 4, I'd be concerned.
Really?
Especially with meat birds, because they grow large fast. So bear with me, I'm going to skip back to that and remind myself the size of that. That is the swimming pool. This is some of these slides come from my presentation on layers, and layers are often raised in smaller quantities. Yeah, so you could get 25 meat birds in there maybe for a week. But I think by a week, it's going to be hectic. So to give you an idea, I think, yeah, so this slide, those chicks these are Lucy's, so I'm not paying attention as much, 2 weeks old or so. So they grow so fast. These are layers, so they're going to grow slower than your meat birds.
And that doesn't look like shavings, pine shavings, was it?
It is.
Okay.
It's Ward lumber shavings, of course.
It looks very fine, so, okay.
Well, so it's been in there for probably 2 weeks. She's added to it. It's got the coloring because that's manure,
Yeah.
and they've worked through it. Fresh shavings are going to be a lot more voluminous, so it'll definitely look different.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Jay,
Yes, sir.
you may have said it. What's the dimensions? I think it's the slide before, or maybe after. Yes. What's the dimensions of that?
In my brooder, that is an old truck box, so that's an 8x24 box van
Oh, okay.
delivery
Yeah.
truck. That's a good question, Aaron. I do think I have a slide that gives you some square footage for
Perfect.
your brooder space, which is an important consideration.
Perfect. Thank you.
Oops. So let's talk about water. Water is one of the most critical things for birds and life in general. These are some different waters that we sell. The quart water, if you've got just a few birds, the gallon water is great for starting chicks. And then this, I think that's a 2 or 3 gallon, maybe even 5 gallon, for the longer term. My note here is to keep the waterer and your feeders off the bedding. Can I show you that? So, oh, see here, there's a board under that waterer. It's hard to see them because they're too small, but there's a board under those waterers because the chicks are going to scratch. That's what chickens do. And if the lip of this waterer is only inches off the bedding, as they scratch, that little trough is going to get full of shavings. Even that 3/4 or 1.5 inches off the bedding, it's going to get full of shavings, but you want to slow it down. So I like to put 2x4 blocks under my waterers. Chicks have a long neck, so they will get into that water as long as they know it's there.
Jay,
Yes.
do you put any additives in your water when you start the chicks out, or do you just use plain water with them?
That's a great question. The first gallon in each waterer, and this is what I use, I put in an electrolyte pack. I think a 3-pack, we sell them for $5 or something, $3, I don't know. Very inexpensive. I like to do that just in the first gallon. It just gives them a boost on that first go around of water. Keep in mind, the chicks are usually hatched on a Wednesday and shipped on a Wednesday, and they get to us either Thursday or Friday. So they have gone through the mail, the U.S. mail, in a less than favorable environment. So they could use a little boost when they get to us. Now, survival rate coming through the U.S. mail is extremely high unless there is a deep freeze during shipping, or we had a lot of mortality one year when there was actually a heat wave. We do chicks all through all year, but mostly through the summer. And there was a heat wave, and apparently the shipment got left on the tarmac at an airport for too long. But generally, the chicks have a high survivability rate. When they're born, they have a sack of yolk in their belly that they draw on for the first number of days, whether they're with mom, with mother hen, or whether they're being shipped to us. So they can sustain themselves for a number of days before they get to us. So yes, electrolyte pack in the water, and I don't know that I have a picture of that.
Thanks, Jay.
You're very welcome, and please keep asking. If you guys are doing chat, for some reason it's not showing up. Dan Edelman, what should the temperature be? Dan, I think I answered that, right?
Yeah, you did, Jay.
Okay. For some reason, I'm not getting the prompt tonight. You know, my daughter, who does our marketing, offered to be my co-host, and now I think I should have taken her up on it. Soon after this stage, I like to use waterers with a poultry nipple. So this bucket is upside down, and this is showing drilling a hole to insert this kind of nipple in the bottom of the bucket. This nipple will be hanging out of the bottom of the bucket. The chickens will quickly learn to peck at that, and when they do, a drop of water will hang down, and they'll consume it. The shininess of that, I think, is what attracts the birds very quickly, and the birds are very smart. The benefit of this is that there's no trough for the shavings to get into. This is going to hang from the ceiling, hang above the birds, and they will reach up and hit that nipple. So there's no mess unless there's a leak, but that's a whole other conversation. And with a 5-gallon bucket, there's a whole lot more supply to keep that water in front of the birds. These are very inexpensive, these poultry nipples. We stock and sell them, and they're so cheap. You just got to make your bucket. Oh, by the way, the drill size for this, and if you buy it from us, it's specified. I think it's 11/32. Whatever the specified diameter of the drill is, it has to be that. If you happen to have a 3/4, it doesn't work. It will leak. I know that from experience. I didn't want to buy 11/32. Trust me. And if it's too small, that this grommet has to go through the hole. It won't go through the hole. Everything I'm teaching you, I've probably learned from screwing it up. Sometimes more than once. So birds, like humans and everything else, need water 24/7. I can't stress that enough, and I'll show you some reasons why. Water should be cleaned, and I like to do a brush clean or a finger clean. That trough around the drinker will get a kind of a funny slimy on it over time. So I like to just use my finger to manipulate that and loosen that up and rinse it out. Some people really like to use bleach. I'm a little bit antsy about that, because unless that is really, really rinsed really, really well, these little birds are not going to deal well with the chlorine in the water. So I will tell you, I don't use any bleach, any cleaning solution when I'm washing my equipment, other than the first time at the beginning of the year. The birds need to be able to drink, not bathe, especially the day-old chicks. Depending on the size of your waterer, I like to put a little bit of gravel in that trough, so that if they jump up on there in their excitement, they don't go swimming. They'll be able to stand on top of the rocks, and they can drink in between the rocks. A wet chick is a recipe for less than favorable results. And those less than favorable results may not manifest themselves for 3 weeks or even until harvest. And I'll show you that in a little bit. You know, I don't think I said this earlier. Your brooder should be set up for 24 hours before the chicks arrive. And that's so that the waterer comes to temperature before the chicks get there, so that they are not shocked by the time they take their first drink. Electrolytes, somebody asked a good question. There it is. And then ample water. There's a good number for you. 1 gallon per 50 chicks. But boy, I can tell you, I think I run more than that. No, I got 100. Lucy's got 150 in there. Yeah, we've got 4 waterers.
Yeah, this says 2 1 gallon.
Yeah, 2 1 gallon. So we've got 150 chicks in the brooder, and I think she's got 4 1 gallon waterers in her brooder. I don't think you can have too much water. And I'll tell you, here's the example why. So chickens have crops. They have a crop on the right chest, and their crop is sort of a holding area. It's not their stomach. We'll get into their anatomy in a little bit, but it's a holding area. Birds and chickens are not domesticated when they started. They are a wild animal, and if they find food, they need to be able to gorge on it and be able to consume a lot. So they have this holding area where they bring it all in quickly, and then it goes through their digestion slowly as their digestive system has capacity. So this is a layer, a red sex-linked layer, and you can see this crop. Now this crop could be just because she's eaten a whole lot all at once. They don't usually get that big, but they get enlarged. This is a meat bird And this isn't a large crop. This is an unusually large crop, and this really represents an issue, and it usually occurs because of too little water. If meat birds in particular run out of water, they're going to keep eating. They are just programmed to eat, and if they don't have water, the solids of the feed are going to impact in their crop. So that's an impacted crop, usually caused by lack of constant water. If one gets an impacted crop, it's hard to deal with. I've tried to massage them. I've tried to work it out. I don't know. I'd like to think I had success, but I just caution you not to get there. Quick story. I often teach a farmer to raise birds. You know, I've got the equipment and all the resources, and I don't necessarily want to do it all the time. So I teach folks. And young man was raising the birds, and I had to spell him for a weekend. And I went into the brooder, and the chicks were out of water. And I thought, oh, that's not a good thing. Filled them all up. I went back that night, and they were out of water again. And I said to the young man, geez, they're out of water. What's going on? He said, oh, yeah, they're always out of water. I just give them more. Well, I said, man, at harvest time, I think this is going to be a problem. And at harvest time, we found a number of impacted crops. And along the way, we had a few birds that just didn't grow the way they should, in part because they weren't able to bring in enough food to sustain the growth rate of the rest of the flock. So we could really tell by looking at the birds at harvest time which ones had an impacted crop. And sure enough, when we eviscerated, they did have evidence of crop issues. So first takeaway, make sure no drafts. Second takeaway, make sure there's water all the time. So let's talk about feeders. There's 4 examples of feeders here. 3 I recommend, a 4th one I don't. This one on the bottom, free choice feeder, is going to have a lot of waste, and you see that there, but more importantly, it's going to be contaminated more heavily than these other ones. This is called a reel feeder. This top piece is going to rotate to keep them from standing on it. And it's hard to see in this grainy photo, but there's a lip here. Birds, when they eat, often flick or just knock the feed around. By having that little lip there, more of it will stay in the feeder, less of it will go on the ground. They'll eat it off the ground, but a lot of it will get wasted. These guys keep the chick from climbing inside, although they can still sit on top of it. These also keep the bird pretty much out of the feeder. So this is what you'd want to start with, any one of these on the first day and first week, and maybe even first couple weeks. Soon, one is going to have to graduate to something with larger capacity, especially with meat birds, because meat birds, as I said, they're programmed to eat. These are a couple waterers. I guess that's a water or 2 of larger capacity. This is a feeder of larger capacity. So we have different varieties of all of these feeders in all the different sizes. This shot is a brooder that has mixed breeds. There's meat birds in here, and they've got a couple layers. So I'm guessing they're going to have eggs, keep the egg layers, and obviously going to harvest the meat birds. It is okay to raise them together to a point. These probably are the same age and showed up on the same day, but you can see the meat birds are much larger than the layers already. These guys are probably about 3 weeks old. And the meat birds probably twice as large, and the meat birds will outcompete your layers. So you just have to make accommodations for that. Also, this feeder space right here in this photo is really marginal to be sufficient. Meat birds need space because they will just compete for food. And if there's not enough space, I'll be able to tell you at harvest time if you haven't had enough space, because they will have scratches all over their backs from being climbed on. I've done multiple harvests with different people, and you know, I've got a bird on the eviscerating table, and I'll say, hey, your feeder space is inadequate. And they'll be like, what? And I'll say, well, I know your birds have been climbing on each other because of this. And they'll be like, how do you know that? You're right, they climb all over each other. Well, unfortunately, the evidence shows up on the evisceration table. Hey, Judith, here's an answer to your question. So Pine shavings, large pine shavings, I didn't say that. Sawdust, they'll tend to peck out a little bit too much, and sawdust will mat down. Shavings has this loft to it, so it'll stay fluffy longer. Sand, sand is okay, but it doesn't bind up the nitrogen into the carbon, so the smell will get on you quicker. Start out with an inch or two. If you've got a wooden floor or even a dirt floor. A concrete floor, you got to put more on there because the concrete will suck the heat out. So make it a little bit thicker. Add fresh bedding often. And that photo that you saw that I took this morning, it's getting to the point where it needs some fresh bedding. Your nose is a great way to test if it starts to smell bad at your 5 or 6 foot. Think of what it smells like at 5 inches. It's going to be a bit harsher down there. So keep it a little bit fresh. If you move your feeders and your waters around, it'll distribute the manure, which will also help the longevity of your bedding life. And I don't think I have it in here, but I'll mention, especially with layers, but also meat birds, if you sprinkle a little cracked corn on your bedding, they will work through the bedding to get to that, and they'll actually aerate the bedding, give it some loft, it'll dry out, and it'll turn the shavings over so that it gives it a little bit longer life. I mentioned no cedar shavings because of the toxic tannins. Questions so far? Judith?
Yeah, actually, I was going to wait, but I'll ask now. I'm wondering about at what point in time you can move the birds from the brooder into, like, we have a fenced orchard area, so they're going to be free range on essentially pasture. At what point can we do that?
I can answer your question if you can tell me the weather. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek because weather really has a big factor in that decision.
If they have shelter, like we're going to put a chain link dog pen inside the orchard to contain them at night, and we're going to put probably plywood roofing over the top of that, so they won't get wet. If they're dry and fully feathered, would they tolerate, I guess, whatever temperatures our summer might throw at them?
Right. In addition to the roof over top, they should have a windbreak, and the wind here comes from the westward direction, so a windbreak on at least the westward side and preferably north and south, so that they can get out of the wind. So the true answer to your question is about 3 weeks is typical for a meat bird when they're fully feathered, as you said, and when there's going to be about 3 days of good weather without rain and without enough cold at night to be dewy. I like to try to time my birds going out so that they're not going to get shocked.
Right. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Jay, do you put the cracked corn down for them as soon as you get them, or do you wait a little while?
I wait for a while because they've sort of got to get their bearings before they're going to eat the cracked corn. So so I don't know. Lucy started doing it at about a week in with this batch. It's part of enrichment, but it's also part of the bedding I talked about. But I would say we probably wait about a week. Was that Michelle?
Yeah, sorry, Jay. I'm trying to keep you on mute because I've got dogs in here and they'll start barking and nobody will hear anything then. So,
okay.
Yes.
And did I answer your question fully?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay. So a little bit of recap on Brooder Supplies. Some sort of containment. And Aaron, there's the number I wanted to make sure I mentioned to everybody. 1 square foot of space per bird in your brooder. Now, obviously, day one, they're not going to need 1 square foot, but they're going to need that space by the time they are ready to go outside. Infrared heat lamp and a holder, and want to mention there are two kind of heat lamps. There is a white heat lamp and there's a red heat lamp. I recommend the red heat lamp for two reasons. The white heat lamp does not give them as much rest. The pituitary gland in all of us is stimulated by daylight, and that white heat lamp is too much. It's too bright, and it stimulates the pituitary gland. So in my opinion, they don't rest as well. The second thing is, if there is any tail pecking and they get to drawing blood, the red heat lamp will mask it, or at least not make it so visible, where the white heat lamp, that red blood is going to show up like a beacon, and birds are a bit cannibalistic, and they will go after that redness. So a red heat lamp, if you have them available, is better than a white. So you're going to need waters, feeders, we talked about, bedding, and ventilated but not drafty. It can't be closed up like a drum, because you do need some air change to get rid of any of that ammonia.
Do you,
Go ahead.
so do you ever clean out the bedding, or you just keep adding new bedding?
I just keep adding new bedding, let them turn it, as I said, and add more. Cleaning out the bedding is one, it's not a great job, but it's too hard on the birds, because usually they're still in the brooder. So I clean out the bedding once they're done with the brooder. So especially with meat birds, we're probably talking 3 weeks. That doesn't take that much bedding, and it's just easier to layer it on top. Is that good, Charlene? Thank you. Thermometer, optional, but can be helpful, especially when we're new. And then a screen to cover the top if your birds are going to be subject to the family cat or dog or something like that. So chicken chats. Chicken chats are one of the great reasons to raise chicks. It's really good for mental health to sit there and watch your birds and talk to them. I will admit that I talk to chicks, baby chicks at times. But chicken chats are also great for observation. As farmers with any species, it's great to be observant. So look and listen. The birds will tell you when they're happy, because they have a happy little chirp, cheep. When they're not happy, it will be more shrill. And with a little bit of observation, you will definitely know the difference. And then you also want to watch for odd behavior. Watch for respiration rates that differ. Usually if a bird's in distress, it's going to be a high respiration rate compared to the normal. If their gait is off, they're not walking well, if they're not holding their head up, you'll see all these things. I will tell you, there's not a whole lot of veterinary care that could be administered to a 2-day-old chick. So hopefully they either ride it out, fix it themselves, or they're probably going to go away fairly quickly.
Jay, do you very often see the birds and the chicks arrive with crooked legs? And in the past, I remember seeing some of the meat birds, they're kind of splay-legged.
Yes, for the most part, that seems to have been bred out of the meat birds these days.
I was hoping.
What Judith is referring to is a meat bird grows really fast, and historically, but I haven't seen it in 10 years, I don't think. Historically, in the past, they would outgrow the ability of their structure to carry the weight, and their legs would fail. By the time harvest times come around, they won't be real active, and they will sit a lot, but I don't believe that's because of leg issues like we used to see in the past. Day-old chicks, or more like 3 or 4 day-old chicks, are subject to mortality, and I have no way to know this for sure because I don't do postmortems, but typically it is a yolk sac infection or a respiratory infection, and there's really no solution to that. Depending on how you handle your livestock, either let them ride it out or euthanize them to take them out of their discomfort. And if anybody wants to know the way to euthanize a chick, I can discuss that with you offline. It's not brutal, but some folks aren't comfortable with that. So brooding, I think, yeah. So brooding, any other questions on brooding? And did I emphasize fresh water, clean bedding, and no drafts enough?
Hey, Jay,
Yes.
do you know about how much water each chick will drink in a day as they kind of progress and get older?
That's an excellent question, Dan, and I have seen the statistic. I don't know that I have it in my presentation because I did this for layers, so no, I don't know.
Okay, do you think it's like a gallon of water a day for like a fully grown chicken? Or
So let me see if I can come up with a rough number. So my chicken tractor, I put 48 birds in, and I usually have 2 to 3 2-gallon waters in there, and I will fill them twice a day. So I don't have all that math in there, but let's say if it's 5 gallons and I'm filling it twice a day, so that's 10 gallons. So 50 birds are consuming 10 gallons a day.
so it's about a quart of water per.
That doesn't seem like enough, so don't trust that.
Okay.
Don't trust that quick and dirty. I think with a quick Google, that could be found. Thanks for the question, and if you don't find an answer, let me know, because I think I've got it in my file at the office.
Okay, thank you, Jay.
So how do we feed poultry? So this is a little bit about the anatomy I promised you. So this is that crop, and this is where they can get impacted with insufficient water. This is the storage area. Sometimes I wish I had a storage area. When there's a good piece of pie or cake in front of me, I'd really like to be able to eat more of it. So birds have a, this is sort of their stomach here. I don't know how to say that word, so I won't try it. And then it goes into the gizzard. You've heard the expression, harder to find than hen's teeth. It's because they don't have teeth. Birds have gizzards, and this is a very muscular structure. It can be harvested or kept during harvest, and apparently it's good to fry with gravy. But it is very muscular, much like the heart. So that gizzard needs stones in it, and grit is something that we'll talk about, I believe, in a minute. Grit becomes the bird's teeth. So they have a little bit of a different digestive system. So we need to start the birds out on a very fine feed and then go up from there. So most feeds, including the poo and grain or Green Mountain feed that we offer at Ward Lumber, are a complete feed. That means everything they need is in the feed, so it's not necessary to supplement. So a chick starter can be used for the first 1 to 3 weeks. And I say 1 to 3 weeks because if somebody has starter left over and they get to the 1 or 2 week time frame, don't throw it out. Just feed it out. Let them eat it. It's very high protein. For your layers, the protein's gonna ramp down faster than your meat birds. But feed out your chick starter. Lucy's birds, as I said, are on week 2+, and she's still got them on some starter. After the 2 to 3 week period, you're going to go to a broiler feed, still high protein, but it's going to be typically a crumble. So it's not the tiny grit, but a larger crumble. And one of the reasons for that is less waste. As the bird gets bigger, if it's a mash or a starter feed, they're going to just flick it all over the place, and you're going to get too much waste. So a little bit about feeding guidelines. So a cool, dry place and rodent-free is a good way to store feed. Cool because high heat will cause some of the protein to degrade, so you'll lose some of the feed value. Dry because if it gets wet, it's going to mold fairly quickly. And rodent-proof, well, as your feed supplier, I might not care if you had rodents because you're going to feed them, but no, really, you don't want to be feeding your rodents. You want to be feeding your feed to your birds. So I like a metal trash can. I put it right in the brooder, so my feed is protected until I get it out of the brooder, and then I just keep it right outside of the brooder or the tractor in that trash can so that nothing's getting into it wherever the birds are located. Sometimes we want to love our animals to death or feed them to death. I suggest not filling your feeder more than half full, because the fuller it is, the more they'll waste. If you're going to be gone for a day, obviously fill it full and let them have at it. I talked about feeding cracked corn. I guess I want to suggest that you're careful with that. Overfeeding cracked corn or even chicken scraps or meat to a bird is going to cause an unbalanced ration. With meat birds, less of an issue than layers. We had a customer who had layer birds and their shells kept getting soft, and they said, "What's going on? Your feed's a problem." Ended up, they love to throw scratch out. They love to throw cracked corn out to their birds, and it was messing up the calcium phosphorus ratio in the eggs, and they were getting soft eggs. So all things with moderation. Grit. Grit is granite that's ground up, and there are different sizes of grit for different stages of birds. I urge you to use that. It is so cheap, and it is a good way to improve your feed conversion. If there isn't grit or something in that gizzard, more of the feed value is going to end up going out the back of the bird. We really want the bird to digest the feed and be able to get the nutrition in that feed to grow, either grow meat as a meat bird or grow eggs and growth and maturity in a layer. So I'll ask a rhetorical question. I hope you're all feeling well today, and if you are you taking antibiotics today? Generally, the answer is going to be no, I hope. The same thing should happen with our birds. Often chick starter feeds were often medicated. That was the norm, that was the standard. If a bird is well, why would we give it antibiotics? That is not great husbandry. One, because we're going to be consuming those antibiotics at some point, and two, resistance and all those other issues. So most feeds, I guess I'll speak for Poulin and Green Mountain, which is what we offer. Those feeds have no antibiotics in them. Can't even buy them with antibiotics. Why were there antibiotics in the feeds in the past? I'll get out of the political reasons or my disdain for big pharma, but there was a reason for having medication in addition to antibiotics, and that is for coccidia. So there was often a coccidiostat in feeds in order to medicate the birds against a coccidiosis issue. Coccidia is an intestinal issue that causes birds to have very watery manure, and they don't absorb nutrients. And I think I've got a slide on that a little bit later. So I'll get back to that. Organic versus commercial, personal choice. Poulin is the conventional feed that we offer. Green Mountain is the organic feed. I will tell you the organic feed is the fastest growing part of our feed business over the last, 16 years that we've been selling feed. Organic is going to be non-GMO, and it's going to be certified. I had a conversation with Josh Poulin, who's a friend and the owner of Poulin Grain, and I said, Josh, if it is not organic, is it GMO? And he said, well, we don't source it that way, so we don't know. I said, Josh, it's GMO corn then. And he said, okay. You can assume if it's not organic that it is GMO, and both have their place. I obviously am a fan of organic. I suppose I've made my case. I will tell you the cost of organic roughly double. So there is a choice to be made there if one wants to feed organic.
So Jay, can I ask about the grit? I'm getting about 40 meat hens.
Mm-hmm.
So about how much do you just like put it in their food, or do you have a separate container for it? And how much do you normally put out for them, like in a day or something like that?
Good question. Thank you for asking. I put it out free choice. I try to put it in a container, especially when I've got my birds on pasture. I try to put it in something that's going to contain it, because we're going to be moving those birds every day, and we want to be able to move the grit with them. In the brooder, I just make a little pile on the floor. The grits often are colored in a way that is different than everything else, so they are attracted to it. Most of the larger grits are going to be white with black flecks in them, so they're very curious about that. So any kind of containment is good. And then I don't know how much to feed out. They will regulate. I'll just put it out, and then when it's gone or getting low, I'll put more out. So it's sort of a free choice thing.
Okay, thanks.
And who has joined us there with you?
This is our Newfoundland Forest.
Wow,
This is the one that he'll bark, but
he looks big just based on the little bit of a head we can see.
he weighs about 105 pounds right now. He's a big boy.
Wow.
But he's gonna get bigger. So
Yeah.
he's
Nice.
he's just over a year old, so he's still got some growing to do.
Wow, he's a puppy still.
Yeah.
So probiotics. I talked about medicated feed a moment ago, and this is the slide I wanted to get back to. So the feed that we offer does not have any kind of medication in it. It has a probiotic, or excuse me, a prebiotic. I said probiotic. Prebiotic. So the purpose of the prebiotic is to bind up those bad bacteria cells like this, that the coccidia are going to connect to the intestinal wall, and it renders those sites, I can't remember the term, it renders those sites useless for absorbing nutrients. So the nutrients pass through the bird is ill thrifty, and potentially it's lethal. So instead of medication, our feed suppliers put in this prebiotic called biomoss, I believe. Oh, it does talk about moss there. So it's a biomoss. It connects the receptors on the bacteria, and it lets them flush through the system better. So the birds are healthier. Villi, there it is. Villi is the attachment site that are blocked by the pathogens if they are not flushed out. So that's in the feed. You don't have to do anything with it, but just know and celebrate it being there. So which feed? I already mentioned this, organic, fastest growing. Michelle asked about grit a little bit. And Michelle, this is a picture from my brooder when I threw down some fresh grit one day. They were very interested. They came over and had some, and then eventually they're no longer interested. This is a 50-pound bag of grit. A 50-pound bag is going to last a lifetime unless you've got hundreds of birds. We do sell it in a little 5-pound bag as well. Somebody said they're going to have a 20 or 25 birds. You can get a 5-pound bag, and that'll last you for a while. It is very inexpensive, and as I said earlier, it improves feed conversion by making sure more of the nutrients go into your bird and not out the back end. So another question break and a water break for me. Okay. So let's talk about meat birds, the birds themselves. So where to get them? We have them available from Ward Lumber. We have a number of different breeds, and we'll go through them a little bit. You can order them through the mail. If you don't live near us, like Dan, you can get them through the mail. Both of our locations have them available if you choose. We'll talk about breeds. This is a Cornish cross. I used to know it's a Cornish rock cross, and it is going to be a white bird, and it is going to grow very quickly. And you can see the size of this bird and these short little legs. And to Judith's point earlier, those legs have to carry a lot of weight fast. They will be about 6 weeks. Maybe you can get 7 or 8 if you want a big carcass, but 6 weeks to harvest, 6 to 7 weeks to harvest. So really quick. This is a breed called Freedom Ranger that we sell, and this is the breed that I raise. I've raised Cornish Cross, but they grow so fast, and if you do it in the summer, they're a bit more subject to heart attacks. And I think we'll get into that here. Freedom Rangers are a bit more ambulatory, a little bit more mobile. They will forage a little bit more. They are about 9 weeks to harvest. So you're adding 50% to your labor. The feed rate, the total feed consumption will be a little bit more, but not 50% more with the Freedom Ranger. I might have stats in my presentation to share that with you. If you go on wardlumber.com, you go to our poultry page, you can see all the breeds we offer. There's pricing on there. Normally I do this presentation in person, and I'm handing you a catalog, but for some reason I can't get my web people to allow me to hand a catalog. Oh no, that's not right. Chris put it on our website. Thank you very much, Aaron. Aaron Benner, who I introduced earlier.
Jay, I have a question.
And his company do our website. Yes, for the question.
What do you see as the finished weight of the 2 different breeds at the age that you're discussing?
So I think I lost you a little bit. Were you asking about finished weight?
Yes, at those time frames, the 6 to 7 weeks and then 9 weeks that you discussed.
So it'll vary on a lot of factors, but if you take a Cornish Cross to 6 weeks, you will end up with about a 4.5 pound carcass. And that's a dressed weight.
Okay.
And then the Freedom Ranger at 9 weeks will be about 4 pounds. Now, you can vary their weight by your harvest date. And Julie and I, the girls aren't home as much anymore. We like about a 3.5 pound bird. That's going to give us leftovers. But if we've got a 5 pound bird, there's too much leftovers and we get very sick of it by the time we can eat it up.
When we were raising birds, we raised them into turkey.
Well, that
We
often
took them for the-
happens.
Yeah, we had 10 and 12 pound birds.
And you were able to keep them alive?
They were great.
Wow.
They were amazing.
Were they a Cornish Cross?
Yeah, and the Cornish rocks.
And you didn't have any heart attacks?
I never heard of that.
Okay. So
Never.
so first time farmers raising meat birds, especially if it's Cornish Cross, will often end up with a larger bird for a lot of reasons, but usually for taking them too long. And if you had 10 pound not 10 pound dressed.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is a turkey. That is a
They were
small
turkey.
turkey. How many weeks? You
I
must
have
have been
no
like
idea.
12, 14
we did
weeks.
not we were not very scientific. We
Okay.
just raised them and then we dressed them when they were big birds.
So normally at this time, I am doing this presentation in person and I'm drawing on a whiteboard. I don't have the technology to do this for you well, but after 6 weeks on a Cornish Cross and 9 weeks on a Freedom Ranger, your feed to weight gain ratio is really going to go backwards on you. Their feed consumption, let me see, for you goes up if we're on a graph, and their weight gain is going to be fast early, and it's going to start to plateau. And you want to get where those two are sort of at a sweet spot. Beyond that, your feed cost goes up, your weight gain really levels, and your cost per pound of carcass is going to be not in your favor.
As I said, we were not very scientific.
Yeah. So those of you, if you're doing this for the first time, try to figure out your harvest date and get that scheduled. Like if you're using our equipment in the summer weekends, it gets busy. So plan ahead. And Judith's experience that she shared with us is not uncommon. And as potentially as your feed supplier, I'm happy to sell you all that feed, but it's not really in your best interest. I covered some of this ground talking about starter versus grower. Mash is not what's in that person's hand. That's actually a crumble. This looks like a crumblet. And then pellet is actually going to be even bigger. And with meat birds, we're never really going to get to the pellet stage. It's either going to be starting with mash and either going to a crumble or crumblet. Organic versus conventional, we talked about. Oh, and my point is, we are what we eat, and so are our birds. If we're feeding organic feed to our birds, then we're eating an organic bird. I've got to move you guys out of the way here. So this talks about some feed numbers that my then assistant Kim put together back in 14. We did a batch of birds for our employee team. We did 2 batches same year, and this talks about some of those numbers. You can see the groups. We did 49 birds and 77 birds. We took the later batch 9 weeks, and as I recall, these are both Freedom Rangers. You can see the gain in carcass size. This is cost in dollars. These are total weight of birds, as I recall. And you can see the cost per pound of bird went up when we went to 9 weeks. We got a bigger carcass, but the efficiency decreased over time. And back to Judith's 10-pound birds, that cost would be much higher per pound. But feed costs haven't gone up significantly, so you should be somewhere under 3 pounds. And this was organic too, by the way. Oh, and it does say Freedom Rangers up there. I did review my slideshow a week ago before I gave the presentation today. But that gives you an idea of where your cost might potentially be. And I do have other resources for figuring out feed rates if you're going to be raising a large batch of birds and you want to put together a budget. So let's talk about feeding your birds as they get older, and now they're out of the brooder. And I think I have information to back to Judith's question about when to take them out. But these are some different feeders. This is a reel feeder that somebody made. This is a commercially available reel feeder, and this is kind of the standard for meat birds. We sell those in 2-foot, 3-foot, and 4-foot lengths, I think. And this is basically a trough feeder. I don't recommend that because they're going to be in it. With this reel, this bar on top spins so they can't roost on it. Most folks are feeding this trough, and in that case, one really needs 1 foot of feeder space per bird, and that really is pretty much a hard and fast number. That comes from the width of the bird. When they are fully grown, their shoulder to shoulder dimension is going to be a little bit less than 1 foot, but you really need that 12 inches of space. Now, this 4-foot feeder affords you 8 feet of space, so you can get 8 birds around it. So you can consider both sides. I referenced earlier, if there's not enough feeder space, I can tell you at harvest time, because they will climb on each other, and in climbing on each other over the backs, they will scratch up the back of the other birds. And I have seen them get infected, which obviously is not good husbandry for our birds. If one does use circular feeders, and I have some hanging circular feeders, it only takes about 9 inches of space, because as they put their head in around a circular feeder, they just need a little less shoulder space. Here we go, moving outside. So 3 to 4 weeks, they have to be well feathered. Maybe not fully feathered. Where's my cursor? Maybe not fully feathered up here, but they really need their body to be well feathered to conserve the heat, because they're going from a brooder where they're very well protected, maybe even a heat lamp on, out to the outside in some cold ground. So as I said, I look for 2 to 3, 4 days of good weather where it's not going to be rainy, and the moisture is really going to be harder on them than anything, but also cold to reduce that initial shock. I like to transition them in the morning after the dew's burned off. If there's any dew, wait till the dew is gone so they're not going to be sitting on wet ground right away. And sometimes I even put a heat lamp or two in the chicken tractor on pasture if I'm worried that it's going to be cold for a couple nights still. That wet and cold is really the killer for any kind of a chicken, but especially meat birds. And it causes water belly, or I can't think of the term, CDs or something like that, but water belly, which is congestive heart failure in humans. And it can start up to 3 weeks old, or excuse me, 6 weeks old. Usually see it start in the 1 to 3 week age. That's where they're most susceptible. But I've read research where it can start up to even 6 weeks old, which becomes harvest date for some breeds. Questions on that, Judith? Anything from your experience that I've missed?
No, but what is water belly?
Water belly, I think I'm going to talk about. It is where fluid accumulates in the abdomen. If I don't talk about that, bring me back to that
Okay.
if I don't get to it by the end. So let's talk about housing. They're going to need housing to get out onto pasture. They're going to need some containment of some sort. This is a chicken tractor. This is Joel Salatin. Any of you that have heard me speak over the years in any of my workshops, I am a huge fan of Joel Salatin. I actually got to visit Polyface Farm in Swope, Virginia, a couple of years ago. He pioneered this chicken tractor concept. This is at Blue Pepper Farm here in Jay. This is chicken tractors that Tyler has built. Joel's chicken tractors, I believe, are 10 by 10. I run a 4 by, sorry, his are 12 by 12, I think. I run a 4 by and a 5 by 12 because I find that that large one is just a little bit too much because usually it's not me moving. They really need to be lightweight. I have it in all capitals. Whoops, sorry. I have it in all caps because I had somebody build me chicken tractors. I had a carpenter on staff and he built me some chicken tractors and they were Fort Knox. Nothing was going to intrude on those chicken tractors, but we could not move them. So for the first 3 seasons, I kept taking components out and eventually got them to a weight that was mobile. So these look like a 1x3 furring strip. My cursor's gone again. Can you see my cursor when I use it?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a 1x3 furring strip which is a great way to do a diagonal. These vertical and horizontals are 2x2. Often folks make them out of spruce so that it's lightweight. Treated can also be used, but it's going to add weight and it's also maybe going to add toxicity to the birds. They need 2 square feet of space in whatever enclosure you use when they are full size. They need shelter from the sun is really important because potentially they're going to be outside on hot days. And if they're baking in the sun, it's really going to stress them. We don't want roast chicken until we are harvesting them. Roasted chicken out in the pasture is not favorable. They need shelter from the wind, but they also need airflow. So one of the first chicken tractors that I built, the sides were closed up on 3 sides, and that was too much. On a hot August day, there was not enough airflow through there. So you can see in the Salatin design here, the back is fully enclosed and then half of each side. That gives them the opportunity to get out of the wind when they need to, and they can get under the cover to be out of the sun. In a chicken tractor for meat birds, there's no roost, there's no nesting, because these guys are going to be sitting on the ground, and I'll talk about breast blisters in a minute. I just realized it's almost 8 o'clock. How have I dribbled on this long? We're getting to the end. I was trying to get done in an hour, and I'm nowhere near an hour here. Sorry about that. These chicken tractors, yes.
So I may be jumping ahead or something like that, but do you have plans for the chicken tractors?
I don't have plans. We often get that question. I think actually Scott, who's our feed guy, does have something. If anyone is interested in any information, including designs, email me, and I will get with Scott to get you the information I can. The materials are often a metal roofing or corrugated on the top and the sides, and then chicken wire on the enclosed top and sides, and then chicken wire on the rest of it, and then just some sort of a frame. But I understand having some sort of a plan to go by is helpful. So if you're interested, email me. I don't know if I think my email is at the end of my phone number. The chicken tractors need to be moved at least daily for a couple of reasons. They're going to eat all the grass and the bugs, which is fine. They're going to put down a fair amount of manure, especially towards the end of their life. And that manure is very hot. It's got a lot of nitrogen in it. So it's going to burn the grass. But more importantly, it's going to be very hard on them, on their breast, if they are sitting in too much manure. So they need to be moved at least once daily. And my practice is, especially for the last week or two, is to move them twice a day. I feed and water twice a day, and I move twice a day. You will have, if you move them twice a day, you'll have great grass where they've been. If you move them once a day, it might actually be a little hard on the grass, and it'll take a little longer for the grass to come back because they're going to hit it so hard, and there's going to be so much nitrogen on it that it's almost damaging.
Jay, can I ask you one more question about the chicken tractors?
Yes.
Do you have like wheels on the back of them so they're easier to move, or no?
Great question. In Joel's design here, he has a little dolly. You can see the wheels here and this handle, and he puts it under the back of the chicken tractor and then tips it up, and it takes the back end off, and there's a rope here. And then it's pulled along on wheels. This is Tyler's design at Blue Pepper. He fashioned some legs that he there's a bolt right here, and they swing up out of the way. I'm not sure that was real effective for him, and one of the interns that I taught tried to do the same thing. It didn't function well. So my 4x12 maybe one's 4x12 roughly. They are small enough that I don't need wheels, and that was one of the reasons I downsized. The mechanics of putting wheels on them wasn't really handy because you need that chicken tractor sitting flush on the ground to keep predators out. Coons like chicken. Everything eats chicken, right? So we need to have a good connection between the ground, and we don't want them up on a wheel so that something gets inside. So what I've done is a smaller tractor that I can then drag with no wheels.
So I'm trying to picture this. This gets dragged with the birds all in it, correct?
Yes, yes.
And the birds are they on the ground, or is there a wire bottom to this?
There's no wire bottom. They're on the ground, and you can see them sort of huddled up in one end. They will quickly learn that when this process starts to take place, they'll go to the other end because they'll learn there's fresh grass, there's fresh bugs. At the beginning, it's sometimes a two-person job because you got to get somebody behind to shush them along. I will suggest that you not use something like a four-wheeler to move the birds. The four-wheeler can move the thing easier, but moving it by hand is important because you've got to be able to hear a bird if it has to squawk. If one runs over a bird, and I've done it, they can easily be injured, or even sometimes it's fatal. But if you move slowly and you're listening, they're going to, and then you just back up. They'll get out from under there and they'll move along. But they will learn to get out of the way.
Thanks.
So Judith, you brought up free range. So I have this in my presentation because two brothers raised birds, and one of them used chicken tractors, and the other had them free range. And I don't know exactly how the one brother did it, but he had them, I think, basically free range around the farm, no fencing, which can be risky. This is a free range setup where the birds are on pasture. But we did their birds together on the same day, and they got the chicks the same day, they harvested the same day, and this is the chicken tractor bird, and this is the free range bird. And the one brother fed a lot less feed, and that was his goal. Let him free range and I won't have to feed him as much. But his
Right.
birds were a whole lot scrawnier, and he would have had to take them longer, and he didn't want to do a second harvest, which, you know,
Right.
if you're doing your own harvest, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. But it was not efficient. So
Okay.
his
Well,
comment at the end was, "I won't do that again."
Well, no, I would feed them as you've already described, in
Mhm.
addition to just letting them be free. We've got like a half an acre orchard that's fenced, and then we would put a pen inside of that for nighttime.
Mhm.
But they would be fed as you've already described.
Yep. And with Freedom Rangers, that's probably more doable than a Cornish cross. A Cornish cross free range really doesn't work. They are not motivated enough. They don't ambulate enough to forage enough.
Oh,
That Cornish cross really needs to be at the feed trough pretty directly.
Interesting.
So waterers, lots of different versions of waterers I've talked about a little bit. This is a manifold made with poultry nipples. And you kind of can see one there. I know where it is, so I can point it out to you. I like the poultry nipple system because these waterers get stuff in them. I don't know if I have a picture of my chicken tractor, but this is a bell waterer that hangs and doesn't have to be moved. I hang the manifold off the back side of the chicken tractor and just put a 5-gallon bucket up top. Again, observation is helpful. We've talked about bedding. We haven't talked about breast blisters or heat stress. I think that's coming in water belly. Let me get into that. There we go. Breast blisters. This is what occurs if the birds aren't moved regularly. Is they generally they're going to wear off their feathers right here anyways. But if they're in the nitrogen, it's really hot. When I say hot, not heat hot, but caustic hot, and it's going to give them a blister. And I've seen birds get an infection there. And this is the breast meat. This is kind of what we're going for right here. So an affected breast is dissatisfying at least. Did somebody have a question? So move frequently is the solution. Clean bedding if they're not going to be in an outside chicken tractor. Adding a litter often, and no roosts. A roost will not necessarily cause an infection right away, but a roost will cause a breast blister on here that can lead to an infection. So meat birds don't need roosts like a layer bird would.
Interesting.
This is an example of heat stress. This is obviously not a meat bird, it's a layer rooster. But if birds are exhibiting this wing out, mouth open, they're too hot. What's the solution? They need air movement primarily. I have been known to put a large floor fan out to move air around the birds to alleviate some of their heat stress. If the heat stress is not abated, in a worst case scenario, they will end up feed up. And birds never are feed up unless they are no longer living. And we are obviously going to take them to harvest at some point, but we want to be able to do that on our schedule, not theirs. Here's an example of water belly and a little bit more about it. Water belly is when the bird ends up with fluid in the abdomen. And this is an example of what happens. Where'd my cursor go? They get this really bulbous bottom end. And that is because their circulatory system is not functioning properly, as can happen in congestive heart failure, and they will retain that fluid. The cause is usually wet and cold. Birds do not like to be wet and cold, and they will get a an infection, a respiratory, potentially, I don't recall. And then they will develop this issue. If it lasts for too long, there can be mortality, but often I will find it on the evisceration table, and what will happen is in evisceration, one will create an incision in the abdomen here, right under the vent in the rear, and that incision, when it's made, one will get a gush of water, and that's a bad sign. There's not supposed to be that much fluid in the bird's abdomen. So you know, I'll be able to say to a farmer, this is water belly, this is example of it, and we can talk about the reasons for it. I'm almost done, I promise. I'm at 2 hours now. Hour and a half, sorry. So harvest time, Judith was talking about this, and I want to bring up her topic. Getting the bird from the pasture to the plate, or at least pasture to the freezer, is usually the largest impediment. So many years ago, I invested in a suite of equipment that's pictured here. This is all available for rent for very cheap. I think it's $40 a day. We're not making any money on the equipment. It's really about empowering farmers to be able to do their own harvest if they choose. The components are a scalder here. That is used to break down the protein in the feather follicle at the skin, goes into a plucker, and then they go to the evisceration table. These are cones where the bird is bled. This is a drying rack where the eviscerated carcass is going to dry before it's packaged. So who can do harvest? You can if you choose. There's a benefit of doing it on farm in that there's less stress. Transport can be stressful on birds, and it can be time consuming depending on the distance. There are folks that do harvest and do it very well for a service. And that is certainly an option if it's something you want to avail yourself of. Oh, this is a quote from a longtime farmer who used our equipment for the first time. She said she'd been doing it on and off for 11 years. They'd rig cones, they borrowed a scalder and a plucker and used trash cans. And yeah, so it's $40 plus tax, so $43 and 4 hours of drive time. She was 2 hours away, but even with 4 hours of drive time, she said it was way more efficient to use our equipment than do it in a cobbed up way. So she was very thankful for the opportunity. So this, I teach a poultry processing workshop. I mentioned it earlier. It's scheduled for early June. That date is in question because of the pandemic. But if we do this and you decide to attend, I will cover all aspects of the processing. And it is a hands-on, or it's at least challenge by choice. Anybody that wants to participate is welcome to in every step of the way. And everybody goes home with a bird to eat yourself. So to Judith's point earlier, I'll bring it up now. The setup and cleanup of the equipment can sometimes take as much or more time than it does to do the actual processing. Depending on one's speed and proficiency, processing can be done in about 10 minutes per bird, all told. That's with some proficiency. Judith's proposal was, if there are, and Judith, you'll correct me if I'm getting this wrong, if there are folks in the area that want to do a group harvest and set up the equipment in one place and bring birds into a central location, that would really reduce the setup and tear down time. I'm often asked to teach chicken harvest, which I love to do. The thing I don't like to do is setting up and tearing down the equipment. So I've taught chicken harvest so much, and I'm asked so much that I say, I'll teach if I don't have to do the equipment. If you raise the birds and you do all the setup, I'll teach, and I love to teach. I've had lots of comments on my teaching. I just don't want to do the setup. So to Judith's point, if there's folks in the area that want to do that on a group basis, and Dan, I'm not sure you want to truck your birds here, but if there are folks local, please email me and we can put something together. So one thing in packaging that I want to focus on is proper packaging. These are birds that have both been done on farm. This one, the shrink was not done as well as this one. We sell shrink bags. The bags shrink 30% of their size down, and the goal is to squeeze out as much air as possible. Air creates freezer burn, and that's what is a lot here. When air and moisture gets in, it creates freezer burn ice. So that's a little tip that I teach in our chicken harvest workshop and the supplies we have available. This is a nice looking bird. Our customer may be our spouse or a family member, or we may be selling them, and we really want our birds to look like the supermarket. It's very confidence building when the birds look just as good as the supermarket birds. So, half hour over, I'm done and ready to come to a close here. Some of the resources I would suggest you avail yourselves of if you're interested. The American Pasture Poultry Producers Association is a great organization. I have some Joel Salatin books that I would normally be holding up and showing you now if we were all together in one space. There are some great YouTube videos out there. On our Ward Lumber website, I think we still have videos going over the poultry processing process. We have equipment from Featherman Equipment, and I've become friends with the owner and have his videos on our website. I actually didn't do too many shameless plugs today. I'm proud of myself. Here's a shameless plug. We sell chicks. I told you that. If anybody is interested in replacement pullets, this is not meat birds, but layer pullets. My daughter Lucy, pictured here 15 years ago, and then just last year, raises a red sex link pullet. They are $15 each. They are available at about 17 weeks, which is somewhere in August. I think the 3rd week of August. They're an Isa Brown. And they are available from Lucy if you want to raise layers. Wasn't she a cute kid? Sorry. So, questions. I'm going to bring you guys where I can see you better.
Jay?
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do the male chicks grow a lot faster than the female for meat production?
They do. In a meat bird, and layers too, but we try not to have roosters in layers. In meat birds, you can tell your males by about 3 weeks old from your females. If I'm going to do 2 harvests, or I'm going to vary it, or somebody wants different sizes, you can get a larger and a smaller carcass by differentiating between the hens and the roosters. So yes, Troy, to your question, your roosters will be larger. So when I share harvest, when I have an intern, we often share the harvest, and I'll take all the hens, and they will take often the roosters. My last intern had 3 kids, so he wanted big birds, and Julie and I only need a small bird, so we took the hens.
And
Other questions?
if we order chicks, they come as a straight run. Is that correct?
When we're talking meat birds, they are always a straight run, yes. With the layers, obviously one can get sexed chicks, but with meat birds, there's no need to differentiate.
Jay, as far as ordering birds, is that something that you would do sooner than later?
I would. This is a good time to start meat birds. I alluded to this earlier, and I guess I don't have a slide on it. It's harder to have meat birds come to harvest age in, say, August or July because of the heat and humidity. I've done it. I've taken batches right through the summer, but I wouldn't suggest it on one's first try. They will have heat stroke, and they will end up in the morning on a hot, humid night, and you get out there to feed them in the morning, and they're going to have blue combs and they're going to have blue gills and they are oxygen deprived, or they're going to be laying on their back. And I don't know about you, but I have a hard time harvesting a bird that's died on its own. Something about it, I want to thoughtfully bring them to the end of their life instead of eating them after they've gone belly up. So now is a good time, Aaron. They would be inside for a couple weeks. And usually by this time of year, it's warm enough to put them outside on pasture by the time they get to 2 to 3 weeks.
So now and then maybe September?
Yes.
Would be-
Usually if I'm doing a second batch, and I don't do 2 batches anymore, I just do bigger batches once because of
Okay.
that setup I talked about. But if one's going to do 2 batches, get the chicks in maybe late July, early August, because the chicks are not so subject to the heat. So actually August, so
Okay.
that when they get to that 3 to 6 week old age, they're more into September when it cools off a little bit. Now, maybe for a first time, smaller batches are better to make sure it works for you and you get your groove down before you got 150 birds and then figure out something's not working right.
You think 25 to 50 for first, is that a good size?
I think depending on how you're going to do harvest, if you're going to do your harvest yourself, stick with 25.
Okay.
50 birds becomes a longer day, and it can be a bit demoralizing, and I want you and Melissa to stay married after harvest day.
So do I.
So I would say take your first batch in a bite-size group, so that it's not overwhelming.
One last question, I'm sorry.
Please ask. Everybody, please ask.
What are your thoughts on, and I don't know anything about this, but canning the meat?
I'm aware of it. I'm not capable of it, but it is done, and it is a great way to preserve the meat.
So that's something you would look into potentially?
Yeah,
Okay.
it takes a pressure cooker because we're talking about meat, and obviously it can spoil. Well, anything can spoil, but it takes a pressure cooker. I've seen it done. Don't know how to do it, but it is a good thing to do, especially if you're going to have more birds than you have freezer space for. I usually raise about 50 birds because we'll use about a bird a week, and I give away some to my family, and that's about all I want. If I had canned, then you could keep it for longer than maybe a year. I do in the chicken harvest seminar that I teach parting out birds. So the photos that I showed was a whole bird. If you're going to want parts, it's easier to part them out when they're fresh than freeze them and have to defrost them and then part them out. And also, if you're going to sell birds, parted out birds will get you more value for the components than a whole bird. That breast meat will get you almost as much as you can get for the whole bird. And then you've got a leg and a thigh left over and a carcass for soup.
You teach that as well?
In my chicken harvest class, I do show how to part out a bird.
If for some reason we're not where we need to be, is that something you would potentially have fall? Or that's tough to do?
You mean teaching the class?
Yeah.
If we're not able to do it in June? Interesting question. I usually do it early in June before most first-timers have to do their own harvest.
Okay.
If I teach it in the fall, most people, at least on their first birds, are done.
Yep.
And they wouldn't be using the information until the next spring. So I'm not sure it makes quite as much sense in the fall.
I agree.
I usually do my birds early so that my birds are ready for harvest before anybody else's are. This year I'm not raising birds. I don't know, there's a little bit going on in the world, so I decided not to raise birds. Didn't have a farmer. So I've partnered with Asgard Farm, which is in Alsabo Forks, and they have birds that we can harvest if we are able to do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. keep the questions coming. I'm happy to answer as long as anybody's got questions.
Jay, I'm going to say thank you and a good night. Good night. 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 I appreciate.
Okay. I throw my. I've got an echo here. I throw my phone number up there. That's my cell phone. If anybody has any questions before, during, or after your birds are in the brooder or on harvest, let me know. I think I'll have my email because of your registration, but I put it up there as well. So please do reach out and keep us in mind for all of those things and more. And during the pandemic, we have in-store shopping, and we also have curbside pickup. So thanks for hanging with me longer than planned. And thank you, Troy Deno, for being a member of the ward number team. You're awesome.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Jay.
You're welcome. See you guys.
Good night.
Later.